Are you recording?
Yes, it just started.
All right, great. Well, welcome to you all. It's really great to have you here with us again today. A number of you have been joining. There's some new folks. Thanks for joining us. I'm Bianca Moebius-Clune, National Director of Climate and Soil Health here at American Farmland Trust. And I'd love for you all to actually introduce yourselves in the chat so that folks know who's in the room. So go ahead, access the chat, and just let us know your name, who you're affiliated with, where you are, maybe just a word or two about how you're excited about biochar, what you want to learn. Before I get us started, I want to acknowledge our partners. We have with us today US Biochar Initiative and USDA's Agricultural Research Service are joining us. They are working with us on this webinar series and on the project that funds it. I also want to acknowledge our funding from USDA NRCS that is making this work possible. Thank you so much to NRCS. We are really grateful and really excited to be working with NRCS and with ARS. So today we've got insights from two California speakers on biochar use in vineyards for you. But before I get into that, first a few brief logistics notes. We are recording this webinar today. And next slide. We will add that recording to our growing series of the toolkit in our virtual library, which is the Farmland Information Centers that American Farmland Trust hosts. We have live transcript enabled. And I want to call out our evaluation survey. We really value your feedback, so please do take a minute to fill that out at the end. We would appreciate your suggestions for improvement, and we definitely would love to hear from you what topics we haven't covered yet, what topics you want to cover in more depth, what questions you are getting that you would love for us to have discussions about in these webinars, because we're going to keep them going. Also, please feel free to, at any time, put your questions in the Q&A. We will get to those toward the end. We will have our presentations first, and then we'll start question and answer. We've got a few for our speakers that we've got prepared, and then we'll turn to the audience. So next slide. I want to take a moment to introduce American Farmland Trust. We are a nationally connected nonprofit organization. We take a holistic approach to agriculture and really work at the interface of the land, the farmers and ranchers who manage that land, and the agricultural practices and systems of practices that they use on that land. Since our founding in 1980, AFT has helped land trusts and other farmland protection programs permanently protect about 8 million acres of agricultural lands. We've also advanced soil health and other conservation practices on millions of acres and supported tens of thousands of farm families, and those numbers keep increasing. It's really exciting. We really work from kitchen tables to the halls of Congress, connecting all of the folks in agriculture for systematic impact. We combine three approaches. We work on the ground with farmers and ranchers. We use our insights from that work to address key gaps in research and technical guidance development, and we build coalitions to develop effective policy and to address priority needs across various partners. So we certainly don't do this work alone, and here you see that today. We like to work across a lot of different organizations that are all bringing their strengths. So we are working across partners and stakeholders, not just to bring about a change for a better agriculture in small pockets, but to actually catalyze a transition to a new conventional agriculture, a new normal. We want to all be proud of our agriculture, and we are envisioning a future where farms and ranches thrive across the country, where their production systems are resilient, soil health promoting, diverse, economically viable, equitable, climate neutral, or better, and sustainable. That's pretty ambitious, and so nobody's going to do that on their own. We invite you all to explore this world with us and create better, more impactful ways as we collaborate and really spread these ways. Our work is integrating biochar as a core tool in the soil health management toolbox. It's a piece of holistic systems. Biochar by itself is not a silver bullet, but we want to integrate it into a fully integrated, normalized approach as part of our agriculture as we see it. We've launched a number of projects to scale up biochar use across the country. We are connecting producers to users of biochar. We are providing technical guidance and to understand and address barriers to integration, including through our national survey that has now closed, and we are analyzing the data, so that's coming in the coming months. This webinar series is a part of our work, and so I want to briefly talk about AFT and our partner hosts here. So next slide. You'll find the full practical biochar implementation webinar series on AFT's Farmland Information Center site. We will post this one shortly after the webinar, so definitely keep looking out for updates, and also there's more webinars coming. I'm here today with AFT colleagues, co-host Aisha Tapp-Ross, soil health and microbial scientist, who has led all the behind-the-scenes work to organize this webinar, and co-host Dr. Kiros Hadgu, senior soil health and biochar scientist. We also have with us today Myles Gray, executive director at US Biochar Initiative, and Kristin Trippe, microbiologist at USDA ARS. Kristin serves as PI on the National Biochar Atlas project that is funding this series, and both will briefly introduce their work before I introduce today's speakers. So with that, go ahead, Kristin.
Thanks, Bianca, and good morning to everybody who's joining us. As Bianca said, my name is Kristin Trippe. I'm a researcher at the USDA Agricultural Research Service, and I'm located in Corvallis, Oregon. We developed the Pacific Northwest Biochar Atlas in the 2017, and that's been kind of updated and released to the public ever since then. But in 2022, we were tasked with expanding this decision support tool, which helps match different biochar properties to soil deficiencies and crop needs. We've expanded that tool to the entire United States, working with several partners, including Washington State University, Oregon State University, US Biochar Initiative, and American Farmland Trust. The beta version of the National Decision Support Tool is available, and I'll put that link in the chat. I'll mention that this is a very beta version of this tool kit. It will be built out as a standalone website over the next year or so. So I encourage you to follow the link that I just put in the chat, and send me your feedback on it at kristin.trippe@usda.gov. We're excited to develop this with stakeholder input so that we can improve its relevance and reach. And with that, I'll pass it over to Myles.
Great. Well, thank you, Bianca, Kristin, and the rest of the AFT team, and also to our speakers. Just a quick intro on USBI, and then we'll pass it over. USBI, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. We're focused on increasing production and use of biochar in North America. And we do that in three main ways. First off, we really focus on developing markets for physical biochar, including using biochar as a soil amendment, as a component of enhanced fertilizers, as a component of potting media, and other markets as well. The next thing we do is we focus on developing standards for biochar to make sure that all of the biochar that is used has really high levels of quality that you can compare between biochars. And the final thing we do is we host an annual conference. We're really excited about this year. It's coming up in September, the 15th to the 18th in Minneapolis. And if you're interested, we would love to see you there. So with that, I will pass it over to our speakers.
All right, I will introduce our speakers. Really excited to have you both with us. Myles and Kristin, thank you. And we have Josiah Hunt and Patrick Riggs with us today. So we are talking here about biochar applications to vineyards. We have some really inspiring perspectives from our speakers. I'm excited to introduce them both. We have with us Josiah Hunt. He is the founder and chief executive officer of Pacific Biochar Benefit Corporation, and he will discuss biochar application in California vineyards and share results from some long-term trials. Since 2008, he has collaborated to innovate methods for biochar production, processing, and application in carbon sequestering ways. We'll then add Patrick Riggs to the conversation. Patrick is the VP of Viticulture at Jack Neal and Son Vineyard Management. He has over 20 years of experience working in ultra-premium certified organic vineyards in the Napa Valley. He also holds a BS in both soil science and bacteriology from the University of Wisconsin and MS in plant pathology from UC Davis. He's also a certified crop advisor and California pest control advisor. So really excited to have both of you with us today. Really looking forward to the conversation. And I'm excited to have Josiah Hunt take the lead here. So go ahead, Josiah.
Okay, thank you. Hey, I'll just talk with you guys for a second before I jump to the slides. I'm going to jump to slides and we're going to be in that whole world. Just a little bit of context setting. I'm going to go through way too many slides. I'm going to go through them fast. It's going to be a whole bunch of information. And that's going to be one thing we're going to do. And, a lot of it's going to be focused on biochar and some of the potential utilization of biochar in cropping, particularly in vineyards in this case, some field trial research, field trial data. And then I think it's really great that we have Patrick here from the Vineyard side, because there's something that I think a lot of us forget about in the biochar production or working on biochar initiative type things is God, there's a lot of things that go wrong. You can have something that's going to work, right? It's not that biochar doesn't work, but how does it work for the farmer? Is it going to be ready at the right time? How do they find information? Actually getting the biochar into the field can have a surprising number of obstacles. And I think a lot of times in the biochar industry, we're focused on things like, growth and crop yield and crop quality and water conservation. But, farming's got a couple different metrics. I mean, of course, those things matter, but ultimately it comes down to the bottom line. So how does farming make money and how does it work for the farmer? And so I think, it's great that Patrick Riggs is here. So I'm gonna kind of handle that first part, and then I think he's, it's great that he'll be here to help us navigate some of that really important stuff that I can say as being in this industry for a long time. I think I'm better at it now, but I'd consistently underestimated the difficulty of just having a product that works and getting data that shows it can work doesn't mean that you'll necessarily get integration into the farming community. And there's so many important things that you need to consider to successfully integrate within a farming community. So with that, I'll get started on the super technical slide deck. Way too many slides. It'll be fun. Oh wait, wrong one. Sorry. Share. Where'd you go? Aha. Okay. Can you all see my screen? Okay, I see some head nodding. Okay, great. I'm going to go into presenter mode and let's go. Okay, so this is it right here. This is kind of the culmination of, we did a lot of experimentation. I'll come back to this, but this picture right here says a lot. We've definitely found that ripping biochar and compost down the planting row, deep ripping it down the planting row, this picture shows kind of that process. And there's a couple different ways to do it, but generally they're going to do a first pass, and that kind of opens up a trench, drop the material in that trench, and then make a second pass to rip it deep down under. That's getting the biochar right in the root zone. And this has shown to be quite successful. So whenever vineyard redevelopment is happening, that's a fantastic opportunity to incorporate biochar at depth in the root zone. And we'll see more about this trial, but I just want to point that out what this opening picture is. So biochar, what is it? Well, I think maybe we start with pyrogenic organic matter is perhaps a better word to describe the real material here. Biochar is a whole other thing. Pyrogenic organic matter, it's been around as long as fire and plant life, which according to geological records is something like 350 to 400 million years ago, when oxygen levels and plant life, were at the right balance for wildfire to start happening. Wildfire happens, charcoal deposits on the soil. Charcoal is highly recalcitrant, so it's been part of topsoil development for a few hundred million years. So when we look at this classic kind of pie chart of organic matter, you got living organisms, fresh organic residue actively decomposing, and then this kind of this mystical stabilized stuff, humus, is oftentimes what it's called. Within that is generally biochar. Generally, soil organic matter is analyzed by loss on ignition or some version of that. And that will not differentiate between pyrogenic organic matter and non-pyrogenic organic matter. It takes a lot more analysis to determine that. And luckily, there has been a lot of analysis done. I'd love to see more, but from this wonderful study back in 2016, it was found that global pyrogenic organic carbon, right, pyrogenic carbon, represents on average 13.7, so basically 14% of total soil organic carbon, and can even be up to 60%, making it one of the largest groups of identifiable compounds in soil. So I think this is something that I think is really important to consider, is that the word biochar is something we created, but the physical material, pyrogenic organic matter, is something that is naturally occurring. It's all around us. It's something that generally is in this realm that we know and love as soil organic matter. And slides are not progressing. Okay. So we had to come up with a new word, biochar, because basically because of climate change mitigation. It was identified that if we took waste organic matter, pyrolyzed that into charcoal, it's an energy positive process that gets this highly recalcitrant material that we could put in farmland. And if we do that in mass, we could put a huge amount of carbon back in the ground and store it for a long, long time. Something up to 16% or so of global annual emissions. That's from a IPCC report in 2019. But basically a whole bunch, it's a big deal. And so that was so exciting, this new climate change mitigation strategy. They thought the word charcoal wasn't really sufficient to carry that anymore. So basically that's where the word biochar was born. So it's a concept. Biochar is a concept. It's a climate change mitigation strategy. And it's also, that word is also used for physical material. And this is the source of a lot of confusion. All right. And so I just want to highlight that up front. The concept is multi-part, right? Like I just explained. The material is basically just charcoal. We can call it pyrogenic organic matter, charcoal, biochar. Those are fairly fluid when we're talking about specifically the material. Since the last 15 years or so, there's been more than 25,000 research articles. I don't know exactly what the number is now, probably over 30. So much so that we're doing like systematic review of the meta-analyses. This is a systematic review of 26 global meta-analyses showing quite a lot of pairwise comparisons in this column here for a positive response. So crop yield between 10 and 15%, water use efficiency, root biomass, soil microbial biomass, soil organic carbon, available phosphorus, plant nitrogen uptake, and then reductions in nitrate leaching and heavy metals. So in general, pretty darn good response. Most biochars, biochars can look a lot like they can look like a lot of different things. These are just various biochars I composed for a picture. Most of it's going to look something like this by the time if it's going out to field. It's generally going to be kind of crushed down or that size. Most of it's shipping something like this, sometimes in big bags, but if you're at the farm level, you're probably going to see something like this. And very commonly, I'd say probably even the vast majority of our biochar is combined with compost before application, because most people applying biochar are also applying compost. And if you're applying biochar and compost, you might as well do it in one pass. And so oftentimes it's easier to ship it to the compost yard and stage it there and then deliver it and apply it one pass. You don't have to, but we've seen that as kind of a common way to keep things easy. This is another example of kind of ripping down in the deep profile of the plantings down the planting row. Highly effective. You can also, this is another one for existing vineyard. So oftentimes you can just kind of do a little side ripping right here. Patrick can talk a little bit more about some of the dynamics of that, but you can kind of lay it down with a compost spreader that's got a little belt there, and then drops it out on either side, and then they come and disc it in. There's different ways to do that. You can do a hollow boot and chisel, and I don't know the words because I don't actually run that kind of farm equipment much, but there's ways to do this. Another is his broadcast, of course. That doesn't always fit. Sometimes you broadcast it and then you guide it just to hit the planting row. Anyways, it can be done. It's got to be moist, but that works fine. When thinking about application rates, it can get really confusing, but ultimately I found, and there's good evidence towards this as well, that one of the most consistent ways to achieve success is to focus on biochar as a portion of your soil organic matter and what impact you look to have in the area that you're cultivating. So here's just kind of a worksheet. This is published on a website. You can use this as well. This is one way to take biochar in tons per acre and translate that. Tons per acre. So for instance, if we're doing that deep rip down to 30 inches and our planting row is 2 feet, 8 feet on center, and that's going to be 25% of the acreage, I know then with this calculator that 10 tons wet is going to be 0.42% SOM equivalent in the area cultivated. And this is really helpful because that helps us fit it within our wider soil organic matter management goals. And it also makes it easy translatable because tons per acre is not always translatable if your cultivation practice is different. I told you I was going to go fast. I'm sorry. I got a lot of stuff to get through, and I want to get to the funner stuff. Or I mean, this is good, but I think some of this stuff people find interesting. Okay, so how does it work for biochar production? A biochar producer has basically this to meet. When the carbon is worth more in the ground than it is in the furnace. Anytime you're taking organic matter and heat, you have the opportunity to generate heat products and or electrical products, thermal products, potentially even some hydrocarbon products. But basically, it has to be worth more in the ground than it is as a source of energy. And if we can make that carbon worth more in the ground than it is in the furnace, a business we might have. So that's one of the basics of it. And how do we do that? Well, from 2016 to 2020, my company, we survived barely on revenue from ag sales alone. And physical product for farmland improvement, we were pretty meager margins and pretty small in capacity, big for the time, but small compared to now. And then in 2020, we registered the first carbon removal credits for biochar. And this provided financial reward for the carbon removal, which was always part of the plan, right? It's a climate mitigation strategy and a physical material. So now we can get reward for that climate mitigation service and the physical product. Here's the tricky part. We got to get that physical product in the ground in order to capture our climate service financial reward. And this is generally more lucrative, and it's easier to get long-term offtakes with highly credible big partners. It's mostly financial organizations and tech companies at this moment that are purchasing the voluntary carbon credit, purchasing in the voluntary carbon markets that we're working with. So these are the contracts that drive our production. And so that means we have to get that stuff in the ground in order to execute on that. And so sometimes the material goes out, sometimes it's purchased, and sometimes it just goes out. We just have to give it away, right? Climate service is an all hands on deck moment for humanity, and the sales are international. The physical material is a bulky luxury item, right? So if the industry, if you've been working on developing the market in the grape industry for the past 5 or 10 years, like I had been, and then the grape industry in California and Oregon takes a nosedive, like it has, suddenly you got a lot of biochar with an undetermined home. But that's okay because the climate service can keep this ship alive. I'll go over a little bit of how that works. So basically, the producer, we produce the material and all of the data along with it. The registrar and marketplace, they confirm all of that data and they confirm our activities are actually net negative. And that basically generates an acknowledgement that a service has been provided, right? That we have done the service. And then the buyer is somebody like Google or these large, or Microsoft is the largest, of course, at the moment. They're basically paying us for a climate service, and the carbon credit is a unit of service, basically. It's a unit of measurement of that service. So here's the producer economics. We take 1 ton of biochar, we basically have 2 products, right? We have a carbon credit, which it's something like 150-ish ballpark per ton CO2, which translates into roughly $400 per bone dry ton biochar, something like that. And then assuming our company is able to capture a 25% margin, that translates to roughly $100 for us. And then the physical material, if we can sell it at 200 at that same thing, we'll end up at $50 take home if sold, after shipping and all that other stuff. Or maybe we just have to deploy it at cost, and that happens as well. So that can go either way, and then that ends up with $50 to $150 gross, and then all the piranhas start taking bites out of it. So that's basically producer economics. Here's the economics as a grower. So the biochar is a physical material that can last for centuries. That's part of its climate service, is we're verifying its durability on a centuries, even to millennia time scale. And so your returns can happen over time. And all the evidence is that the physical material, you can have some initial response. There can be some nutrients in the ash and a little bit of a pH kick in the ash. And some of those can give an early response, but the crop yield and water conservation values tend to be commensurate with the presence of the physical material. So as long as the material stays in your soil, it can provide services, and that can be over a long time. I should have put this later. I'll come back to that. So here's an example. Well, okay, never mind. I'll deal with it. So when thinking about biochar applications from a grower's perspective, the best opportunity is where these things overlap. The maximum economic potential for a grower is generally going to be where you have poor soil, particularly poor soil with low organic matter, and a high value crop. Where these things overlap is your greatest, is your maximum potential economic gain. And I'll try to make that more clear as we go along. So I put together all these worksheets to look at return on investment and net present value kind of stuff for biochar. So instead of trying to look at, well, how much can we sell it at, we've been trying to look at, well, how much is it worth from the grower's perspective? How much is it worth? When can you get a positive return on investment? And if we were to do like a net present value assessment, what might be looking at? And so here we have cost per ton, right? This is varying cost. This is kind of like a cost reference. Then here's kind of some inputs. And then this is how many harvests, right? Wheat can be a rotation crop, or it can be even 2 crops per year. So this is not necessarily years. But wheat ain't worth a lot. So, assuming that the biochar is a fixed cost, and we're going to get a 10% crop yield, which is the global average according to the meta-analysis, systematic review of meta-analysis. So it might be, might not be till 6th harvest or so. Well, if we're at 180, it's not going to be till the 10th harvest. Whoops. It's not going to be till the 10th harvest that we even get a positive return. If we can get that biochar delivered, it landed to the farmer, landed and spread to the farmer at $50 per ton, they're going to see a positive return on investment, by the 3rd harvest. But at 180 or let's say 200, it's going to be 10 harvests at least until they get a positive return on investment. That's because wheat is a low value crop. Now, maybe if you have an incredibly poor soil and your yield increase is above the 10% average, maybe 20 to 30%, then we're potentially in a different ballpark, right? So this is why value of crop and basically how poor your soil is tells you how much improvement room there is, and there is a strong correlation there. But now if we go to a slightly higher value crop, now it's very different, at that kind of $200 price range with almonds, assuming a 10% crop yield, we're starting to get into notable return on investment in years 4 through 6. And quite notable by the time you get to 10 harvests out, right? So 2 years of growing, 10 years of harvest, 12 years from your time investment, that gets you 226. Net present value at 20 year. So that's basically looking on the biochar's investment would be something like $1,200 per ton of biochar. So from a grower's perspective, this is an incredible opportunity to look at. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to work, and Patrick can talk about that, because just because it can work doesn't mean it's going to. That doesn't mean that you can convince the CFO or anybody that this is an investment worth investing in. But that is the case. Now, California wing grapes, I know it's been a really bad couple of years, so we take these numbers with a grain of salt. This is from a 2023 average or 24 average, I think. But this doesn't account for how many grapes were left on the vine. This is just an average of what was actually harvested across California. So potentially within your 10-year time frame, quite a positive return on investment. And we know this, not just from the global averages, but from field work done in California. This is a field trial done in California. There's a lot about this on the website. I've presented about this multiple times, so I'll blast right through this because you can find more information on the website and other places. This is the Oasis Vineyard field trial, and you can find information about that pretty easily. 8 years in the ground, 6 years of harvest. Again, here that was that was the organic matter that we did in this trial, organic matter equivalent of 0.42% in the area cultivated, 10 tons per acre wet, and with compost as well. So here's looking 6 harvests out, the yield above control. So we did compost only, biochar only, and then compost plus biochar, right? So it's 15 tons compost, 10 tons biochar, and then 15 plus 10. Quite a lot. It was a very low organic matter soil, and they responded quite well. So this is the tons per acre total. So over the six harvests measured, the compost and biochar yielded almost 12 additional tons per acre, so averaging almost 2 additional tons per year. And interestingly, the yield differences were the highest in the lower yielding years, which is great because that's when your crop's worth the most, and when, you know, it's a, I don't know. So that it's an interesting note that in the lowest yielding years, we had the highest increase above control. 30. So we're looking at kind of a. Anyways, I can show those at a different time. Again, all this information is online, and this is just one trial, so you know, take it with a grain of salt as well. So yield is great and all, but really with grapes, of course, it's quality. And particularly when this data started coming out, and we were also seeing that there was kind of an overabundance of grape yield, this made the quality metrics that much more important. So we did 2 years of quality metrics. The first year, you're looking at, well, that's what you'll see here, this fourth leaf grape quality. Little effect on biochar, little effect of biochar on Brix and pH. There were larger berries. We did see larger berries. There did seem to be larger berries. Berry volume 8% with the biochar. That was a notable difference. And with the sugar per berry was looking better as well. But that's, you know, largely by how big they are. Interesting though, with those bigger berries, we did not see less color, which is really good to know. Like that's a nice thing. Potentially even slightly better, but you know, statistical difference was not really. This was, again, it's not statistically significant. So fifth harvest, we looked at some more stuff. Not much, you know, looking at all this, you know, Brix, glucose, fructose, pH, tartaric, all this stuff. Not much difference here. We did see a little bit of difference in the nitrogen, but again, these are pretty small numbers overall, and the overall consensus is that there was just not really statistical difference or significant or profound difference, which is good. I mean, if we increase yield without negatively impacting quality, that's a good thing. An assessment of the value, this is assuming $1,500 per ton on each year, which is not accurate. It is not precise, but that's fairly accurate for the average from this field. So the biochar alone increased the revenue above control by 11,500. So that 10 tons per acre yielded on a per acre basis $11,500 over 6 harvests. So good return on investment in that one. If we take this further out, if we look at the net present value on kind of a 20-year at a 5% discount rate, that'd be $5,000 per ton of biochar. So quite valuable in what it's providing. And I just, for fun, I put in 1,000 year. It's easier to look at that on a 0% discount rate because a 5% basically cuts off anything after 100 and something years. 0%. This is each ton of biochar providing that much value, which is really, I think, underlining how valuable, you know, taking care of our soils can be. A healthy soil can give us so much more. We get much more carrying capacity. So that matters. Those same number, basically looking at average California wine grape, there can be some significant value there. I already kind of showed that one. Okay, I know I'm probably over time already. I'll zap it through real fast here. This is some data from what Patrick Riggs is doing. So Patrick, do you want to just real quick, this is basically, I've covered everything, and I can do some Q&A, and I can hop back into some of the slides during the Q&A. But do you want to explain here, and I can flip through these couple slides?
Yeah, that's fine. That's easy. So this image is from 2020. So this was our first kind of field foray, say, into using biochar. So we do these images every year. It's aerial, you know, used to be called NDVI. Now it's EVI, vegetative index, right? The darker the color, the more vigorous the vine. That's basically what that means, right? So that area that, you know, I provided this to Josiah, so that crudely in blue, in that block generally has been and was kind of the weakest section of the vineyard, right? This is an existing vineyard. It was planted in what, 1990, like 8 maybe, right? So it's not young. And you know, the client, we wanted to do something about this, right? To make it more homogeneous, right? So this existing vineyard here, this is a hillside vineyard. It's all volcanic based soils, not super deep. I wouldn't quite call it poor compared to what you would grow vegetables in, or you know, more commodity crops. Yes, it's poor, but so in 2022 we put biochar in that section, right? Got it from Josiah. This we put in basically the equivalent of roughly 25 tons per acre, roughly. And that was, if I remember correctly, it was the compost biochar blend.
Yeah, yeah.
That makes the most sense for us. And then this vineyard has really narrow rows. It's 6 foot between rows. So in order to get the biochar into the ground, which from what we've seen is pretty much critical, we used a trencher. Actually, we rented a trencher because there's no equipment that can run down a 6 foot row that has enough power to make a hole that's 3 feet without, of course, destroying the vines that are already there, which would not be the case. So we did this in 2022. We ran a trencher, basically filled the trench in partially with biochar, and then ran the trencher again. The second pass was kind of a mixing, just changed the angle of the trencher and how it worked to kind of, again, incorporate it into the soil, right? We didn't want a massive boundary layer. Anybody in soils knows that that's generally not what you want, no matter what it is. So we did that in 2022, and then Josiah, do you want to go to the?
Yeah. So I think it says in here the winter 2020 and 2021.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So then this is before, and then this
is
next...
before application. Yes. And then
yeah, and then this would be after.
Okay. So this is the next year, right? So that section we put biochar is now the most vigorous part of the vineyard, which, from my perspective was very surprising. I mean, I assumed, this is gonna, take 2, 3, 5 years. Maybe we'll see a small difference. It was like, wow, okay. Well, of course, it's biochar compost. So there's, because of the compost, there's a fertilizer component, right? And then we did trench in soils that are relatively poor. So we did open the ground to, improved air and water movement, right? What's interesting is this trend is still there today in 2025. That section is still the most vigorous part of that vineyard block where we use the biochar. So that's in itself, that's a win just right there. And then, of course, as part of this, I did a few little background information to look. So to get that same amount or more, let's say vine growth, vigor, health, whatever term you want to use, we're actually irrigating it less every year since that point. Now, of course, there's variability with seasonal every year, but if you look at the rough gallons per vine that we did before we put the biochar on, and that what we've done since, every year it's been less. So I have vines that are bigger, healthier, more resilient, which for us, that's a big one for drought and heat stress. And yet I'm using less water, right? And it's not just the water use. When I have to irrigate, I'm sending a person out there to open and close valves. So that person is going less, which of course is a money saver for clients and everything else. So it's been a big win for us, really. And it's still going strong, which is also pretty cool. I mean, I assumed when we did this originally that maybe by now, let's say in 2025, we would have seen something. The fact that we saw it immediately was really impressive. And then it's stayed that way.
Awesome, thanks. All right, so just to recap, charcoal, biochar, pyrogenic organic matter is a natural part of soil development, makes up roughly 14% of soil organic matter globally, a lot more in some places. As a climate change strategy, it got a new name, biochar. Again, so biochar is kind of that word is born of climate change mitigation tool, strategy, but it is also the physical material. The financial of this biochar thing can work out well for farmers and landowners. I think it's a great time. I think because humanity needs to solve this climate crisis, and biochar is a great tool to help us do that. It looks like we're going to have a lot of biochar, and those who manage land can utilize this moment to their advantage, and to help grow crops. Biochar application, just for kind of how to use it, it can look a lot like compost application machinery wise. And as we found with a lot of growers, is that considering biochar as part of your SOM management is highly effective. Okay, that's recapping it. And to pass it off, I know I put a whole bunch there. I threw a lot there, and that's why I had to throw the recap in at the end. But then also, I just want to put to Patrick this overall question that now if climate change mitigation can help with the biochar production costs, meaning that biochar can be much more available now than it ever was before, and at prices that we never could have achieved before, and that there is a huge body of evidence showing that the average crop yield increase can be quite profitable for vineyards if they even just hit the average, and beating that quite better. So we're looking at basically a sale price of biochar of, say $0 to $200 or $500 maybe even, and a potential return on investment, within 10 to 20 years in the thousands. What are we missing here? How do we make it work for you? And how do we make that work? And what are the difficulties? And just because something can potentially get a positive return on investment, why would a vineyard not do it? And how can we help? How can we help with vineyards and other farming in general to make this work for you?
Well, part of it is just, I don't want to say the wrong word it's not knowledge gap, but it's something similar, right? First you have to be thinking long term, right? This isn't a 5-year investment. It's not a 2-year investment. So, perennial crops, at least the way we look at it. So perennial crops are big, right? Because we're targeting vines to last for 25 years, right? So that benefit is there. Nobody wants to put money up front and then have a maybe, right? So for example, the Oasis trial is super helpful, right? And then it's of course getting the word out. So I can say, we started in a couple spots, and then we've expanded it to all of our clients upon redevelopment, right? But then I've also recommended it to people just talking to them, like, hey, you guys should consider this, or, your soils are basically pure rock, right? There's no water holding capacity. So any improvement that you see, like if you're already going to put out compost or even gypsum or lime, mix it in the yard at the place and have it delivered. There's no cost. The cost is to bring the material there, right? Of course. But then if you're already spreading something else, using a spreader and then ripping in or something like that at development, right? You're spending that money anyways, right? Whether it's, okay, hey, I need to adjust the pH of my soil, whether that's with lime, calcite, or even soil sulfur, right? There's a benefit to throw biochar or biochar compost in as well. You're already paying for the tractor, the ripper, the spreader to go anyways, right? It's just that added material cost. So a little bit is just the changing of minds, right? And then, the more and more, the scientific data is there. It's getting that out. And this is, basically classic extension role, right? And of course, word of mouth to people that you trust. Have you tried it? Where has it failed? Where is it? When we started looking into this, it was I want to say 2018, kind of right when Pacific Biochar started. I went to a Soil Science Society of America meeting. I think it was in San Diego. And there was all sorts of research, and everybody had biochar, posters and presentations, and 90% of them were insignificant. But then I looked at how they were using it, and they were using it like a fertilizer. So, you know, and that's where they were failing. It's not a fertilizer, right? Compost, yes, you can call it fertilizer, but it's not. It's a soil amendment. You have to think about it the same way you think about lime, soil sulfur, bulk gypsum, that you got to get it in the ground. You got to incorporate it, right? It's not just like, hey, let's put a pile under the vine or next to the plant or in the planting hole, or that kind of is a waste of time. And I think there was a lot of people that were thinking that way, or making a little band or throwing it under the vine or under the tree, or right. You got to get it in the ground. And that, of course, is the challenge, depending on how much room do you have, how deep do you want to go, right? What kind of implements do you have? What's the, you know, what do you need? So now, of course, like at the replanting of a vineyard or an orchard, right, it's empty most of the time. So you got free reign. If you're trying to do it in an existing orchard, vineyard, etc., it becomes more challenging, of course. And of course, for annual crops, I mean, I guess there's a fallow period. You could do it then if you're doing annuals, right, to incorporate it. And you wouldn't necessarily, in that case, have to go as deep, because, you know, we tentatively think of grapevines as a 36-inch root zone, right? It's much deeper than that, but we can't really deal much deeper than 36 inches, really. You can't really incorporate anything much deeper than that. So the implementation, or rather the, like, why aren't more people doing it? I think they are, at least for here up here. I know lots of people who we've recommended and they've said, yes, we've done it, or I think just that process with anyone in agriculture is slow, right? I think most people in agriculture are not the fast adopters. There are some people that will, but they're like, hey, show me that my neighbors, it worked there before I made the investment, or I don't want to be the first one to do it. You know, our example, we started with spot treatments, right? Like the NDVI image. We started there, showed that it worked, and it achieved really much better than we had anticipated, honestly. And then now, whenever we do redevelopment, it's become a standard operating procedure with every vineyard. It's, you know, we did 3 vineyards this year replanting, and they all had compost biochar as part of their incorporation, as part of the, you know, do the soil pits, see what else is needed, and compost biochar, and then if they need some lime or gypsum or not, or right, it's now standard operating for us. So,
what do you think was the most influential factor in making biochar standard operating procedure for you?
Well, I mean, I think the seeing the spot results being so positive so quickly, that was surprising. I didn't expect that. You know, we did that same thing in another location in a smaller scale, and where we, you know, it was 12-foot rows, so we used a mini excavator to put it in the ground. And, you know, I just with my eye could see the difference. And this was like a little corner of a vineyard that probably was a road, right? Like 10 years ago, that then somebody just decided, okay, I'm going to make this road a actual angle, and then I'm going to put a few more vines in, right? And it wasn't probably properly ripped or prepped, or right, it didn't have all the regular stuff that we do. And, you know, it wasn't as dramatic as the NDVI image, but you could go and you could literally see the difference. If I can see the difference, right? Like, okay, this is clearly working, and I understand the science behind it and what I'm getting. And then you think, well, why would I not want to provide more for us, you know, heat resistance, drought resistance, right? We lose fruit when it gets really hot, right? If I can mitigate that, right, where I don't have shrivel, where I'm losing weight because the vines are happier and healthier, that's a win, right? Not just on the yield front, that's a win on a quality front too. Because nobody wants raisin fruit or partially dehydrated fruit, or, you know, that sort of thing. Some people do, but rarely. And then, you know, that's also, like I said, if you were already doing some of this, right, even if you were using compost, it's not a big step to say, well, you know, let's do the 50-50 blend, right? Because once you can prove that, hey, it works, like I said, when we did the spot treatments, and it's not a like, well, maybe it's working in 5 years. We noticed it right away, right? Then it's easy to say, hey, this will help us for the lifetime of this vineyard, right? Again, if you're thinking 25 years, like if that means less fertilizer, less water, less trips, more fruit, or even the same amount of fruit with less dehydration, less sun damage, all that stuff, then that adds up, and then it becomes for sure worth it.
Yeah. Pulling off one of the questions that you had, Bianca, it looks really appropriate for the moment here. We've kind of gotten through some of the good ones already, and I think another one is you took a kind of a pioneering approach in this, Patrick. You said like many farmers are kind of slow adoption, but you did something unique here and kind of took a proactive and pioneering kind of approach, and you found success in that. What resources do you wish might have been available to you? What might have made this easier for you rather than doing it all on your own and kind of figuring it all out?
Well, I mean, in the best possible world, right? The Oasis trial would have already existed, right? I mean, that's the truth, right? In vineyards, showing it on soil. I mean, you didn't mention, Josiah, but all that soil, for anybody listening, it's all sandy loam. It holds no water. The stuff from that trial in the central coast of California, it's not quite a beach, but just about, right? So again, for them, any improvement in water holding capacity directly relates for them to yield, right? And that's, with no quality declines, that's a win, right? I mean, obviously something like that, right? But at the same time, we were trying to solve specific problems, right? Before we went to the biochar, I had done soil pits in that area to say, well, is this a chemistry problem, right? Is there something missing? Because we have generally poor soils. So maybe there was a nutrient missing, maybe there was nematodes. I kind of ruled out things to say, okay, is it this, is it this, is it this? And it became ultimately a soil physical problem. That was it. Is in that spot, there's basically 22 to 24 inches of soil over compressed volcanic ash, right? So the problem was water holding capacity. Like, I mean, I would have had to use a huge quantity of water to make that vineyard homogeneous, right? And I'd have to do that for the lifetime of the vineyard. Well, do I have that water? Maybe. But do I want to use it that way? Not really. But of course, still have demands from clients and buyers to, make it homogeneous. So, we started there, right? And then integrating that into the ground pretty much improved the water holding capacity of that instantly, right? Or just about instantly. And it's held, which I think is really the cool part.
Yeah.
Right? Is comparing those NDVI images from 2020 before the application and then every one since. And that section, even, I'm going to that vineyard later today, and I can tell you, I already know that section is more vigorous with less water than, where it was the complete opposite before.
That's really interesting. You start off by saying that you wish that we had the Oasis field trial data earlier. And I just want to point out to everybody, I didn't acknowledge, but I dropped a link to that in the chat. I say it's available online, but I went ahead and dropped a link. There's several reports now. So that one I dropped a link to is our 6th harvest report. There's also a 5th and a 3rd harvest report that we've been including along the way. I didn't realize that had so much of an impact in helping provide you with information.
Oh yeah, it definitely put us over the top, right? Does that make sense?
Okay.
Like,
yeah, and I'm
we can
underlining
use
that because
locally
we have NRCS and an AFT in the room right now. So I just thought that these are some of the, and USBI. I'm sorry. So this is like the best trio of people that could help take what you were just saying there and help make that a more available resource to help help with furthering the field trial data field trial body of data to help farmers like you in decision making.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if you kind of imagine it, the scenarios in your head, it's what is that biochar doing? Well, depending on what soils you have, right? If you're in a giant heavy clay and you break that clay up and you add the biochar, the clay is going to coat the biochar, but you're going to get more air and more space is then going to be present. You want to use the soil is going to be fluffier, right? Which, if you have a really, really heavy soil, that's great. That's what you want. You want improved drainage, less flooding, right? Better nutrient and more air, so you don't have anoxic environments. And then on the full flip side with the sand, like Oasis, it doesn't hold any water, goes right through it. So again, anything you can do to improve that is a win. And then you have these little tiny particles of carbon that have holes in them, but things will grow in and around and on top of them, which then just speeds up the process to be like, increasing your organic matter. I mean, everybody, I think, NRCS people, if you increase your organic matter percentage, even a tiny amount, right, it's a huge amount of water. Like it's so much more, and it's crazy. And this is pretty much, I think of it as basically it's an instant increase in soil organic matter for the rest of your natural life, right? When I'm gone, the places we had biochar, that biochar will still be there, right? It's not going anywhere. So I instantly just improve the water holding capacity of the soil for the rest of that vineyard's life, 2-3 generations. So no
That's
matter
all so
what,
fascinating and so compelling.
so whatever comes, like if things get drier or not, we're in a good place. But even on, places that with really heavy clay it's hard to work, it's hard to farm because, the soils are really dense, right? Maybe you have to do more cultivation to allow yourself to introduce oxygen into the soil, and nothing really grows because it's a high water table. Like, in that case, the biochar is just basically making space, right? It's making room. There's now more air and more little tiny pores that make it easier for roots to grow, right? You're lowering the pressure threshold so roots can then penetrate instead of all that clay cementing into a wall and the roots hitting it and then saying, no, thank you, I'm going to go sideways, right? Like,
That's really interesting, Patrick, because, often you hear people say, oh, biochar is really effective in sandy soils particularly and in acidic soils particularly. You're talking about clayey soils here, and I'm curious if you have had examples where you've applied biochar to clayey soils where you've seen similar examples like this, or if you know folks that have done that.
I know people who've done it, yeah, or are doing it now, to be honest.
It's really exciting because that's a side we haven't really discussed yet.
Different idea. It's not necessarily there about improving water holding capacity like you would in a light textured soil. It's about, maybe improving drainage, improving aeration, which of course, your roots got to breathe. If they're not breathing, then your vines any of your plants, they're going to suffer. So it's lowering their stress, and your risk. If it makes a stronger plant that then is more productive, that's a win, right?
That's really exciting. I'm curious if we can back up for a moment. You were talking about how it really took you being willing to innovate, do something new. It was a process for you to get to the point where you started to actually apply biochar. I wonder if you can describe a little more how you went through that process. Think of yourself as when you had never heard of biochar before, all the way until you applied it. How long was that? What did it take? What were the factors along the way? And then tell us a bit about how we would replicate that for a new conventional agriculture, right? How would we get everybody to a point where they take that process and get to a point where they apply it where it makes sense?
Well, I mean, it's a little bit of a tough one. I have a solid background, right? In soil science, microbiology, like, I have an education in those things. So that, not everybody has that. And, everybody has something different, right? So that helps me in this arena versus many others because I know all soils are pretty much starved for carbon, right? Like a lot of people don't even from a microbial perspective, right? Like there's all these other things like that because of my background, right, academically, that I'm aware of. So I saw people, I was thinking about it, I went to that conference, that was interesting, and like, hey, what could we use this? Could this be better? And then it's just finding the spot, right? That's the first thing, is where, because if you got to know, like, I did soil pits myself before we put that, the vineyard image that was up, right? So I had already ruled out that, okay, it's not, I'm missing a random nutrient, right? It's not a nematode problem. It's right. It came down to, okay, it's a physical problem, right? A soil physical problem, right? So how do I fix that, right? With an existing vineyard, in an existing vineyard. Well, that's almost impossible, right? I mean, there isn't really, like, I can't really, rip every row, or like I would destroy the vineyard. So how am I going to do that, right? And I don't want to do it every year. Maybe I find, okay, I'm going to do something small, every year for the next 25, like, if I can get something to, one and done it, like, that's way better. Like, versus, okay, I'm going to add a little bit this year, a little bit next year. So, I have a boss who I've worked with for a long time, and there's a good amount of trust there. So that is also part of it, to say, hey, I think this could benefit us. And I think here is one of the spots where we can do it in a smaller scale, which of course helps on the cost side. And then we can kind of work out some of the kinks. I had already knew or figured out that, just from looking at what other people had done on the research side, that, putting it on top of the soil was a waste of time, right? That incorporation was you have to mix it in the ground, right? Then it's the practical question of how do we achieve that? And it was a risk. And like I said, if it hadn't been positive immediately, would we have then jumped into, kind of standard operating in the future? I think we probably would have. It just would have taken more time, right? The switch from having the success in spot treatments to going to standard operating procedure for us was really quick, right? We're like,
And when you
okay,
say really quick, do you mean a couple of years? Like it was
a
basically
couple of
that
years.
immediate reaction?
It was, it was a year or two, and and then we had access to material, right? Josiah was always good about sending us material if we needed it, right? There was local suppliers, and where the trucking doesn't, kill you because it's coming from really, 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 really far away, right?
And so when you say standard operating procedure, are you talking about you're now spreading it on the entire farm, or you're still looking for areas to spot treat, or something in between? What goes into that decision making?
Well, so now if we do redevelopment, right? So when a vineyard is ready to go, right? It's old, needs to be replanted, right? So that process is you remove the old vines. Usually I'll do a bunch of soil pits depending on, the size of the vineyard, everything else, the number, of course. And we see what it needs. Maybe the pH needs adjustment. Maybe, it's got high mag and we need some calcium, or, we do all that work. And then as part of that, it's now standard operating to, 10 to 25 tons per acre of compost biochar, right? Now, both of those have a purpose too, because I know that the act of ripping, right? So deep ripping, I am adding oxygen to the soil. I am burning organic matter. That is part of the process. So I am also partially making up for that by using the compost biochar blend, right? How much am I making up for that in the short term versus, right? Who knows? But I am, by putting that carbon back, because yes, invariably, because I'm removing 30-year-old vines, there is carbon lost, right? Because I'm cultivating and opening the soil to oxygen, right? There will be microbial action against carbon. It will go into CO2, right? So I'm also offsetting that. So I'm also thinking a little bit about that as part of our like, hey, I have this loss because of this. And I know that these additions will also benefit this vineyard for the next 25 years. And this is my time to do it, right? Because once the vineyard is in, or the orchard or whatever, it becomes much more challenging from a logistical perspective to do it, right? So it's like, that's your one shot. So why not put everything you can into it, which is kind of what we've done, or how we've done things, is we do a lot as a vineyard management company up front. And then after that, we end up doing very little, like needing extra fertilizer or things like that. And then, yes, existing vineyards, for example, we're still looking for little spots where we know, hey, this vineyard has got another 15 years to go, and there's a weak spot here. What can we do to fix that? What can we do? Do we believe is it soil chemistry? Is it soil physical? Like, what is the reason? Is it biological? And then, the biochar isn't necessarily, or, is there a chemistry problem? And then the biochar isn't necessarily the best solution, but it's figuring that out and then saying, okay, well, I would say most of my vineyards are in pretty good shape. So we haven't really done a bunch of additional spot treatments of late. We got a couple of small ones that, we might do. But if you can start out in a good place, it makes everything so much easier moving forward.
Well,
Make
we've
sense?
got some, yeah, it does. That's really interesting. It sounds like there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of ways to think about it. It really kind of takes understanding the soil, understanding the constraints, doing some soil testing, doing some pit work. We've got some questions from the audience, so I want to make sure to bring some of those in. We've got some questions about mixing biochar. So one question is, when you're inoculating with compost, does a 1:2 ratio always work? Are there ways to adjust those ratios? How about other locally available biostimulants, mycorrhizal inoculation? Some folks wondering about how do you work out the ratio for mixing biochar with other things? Is there a handbook or a rule of thumb? Anything that's out there?
The first couple of years, I had some spots where Josiah sent me, pure 100%, right? Biochar that we put out. And that's just a cost, right? Especially early, it was expensive, right? And then the best mix seems to be, is integrating it so the biochar is composted. It's with the compost pile. It's not like the compost is done and then you just toss the biochar in and then mix it. It's kind of together. And I think, what is it now, Josiah, like 30, 60 or 40%, like roughly?
Getting biochar into the early pile is a commitment, because that means the compost yard has to commit that pile to a certain client. And usually, it's really hard to do because, you've got this window. A lot of the compost applications, if you're doing a RIP, if you're doing a vineyard renovation, a replanting, you can have a little more scheduling, but a lot of times the compost end of harvest kind of compost, it's decided by the rains and the harvest, and so that comes at the last minute, or it might not come at all if we don't get that window. So it's been very, very difficult. We've seen that when biochar is included in early stage compost, the compost is improved, the biochar is improved. It's a fantastic product that is just instantly awesome. But the logistics of getting that, it's a challenge, and you already have to kind of know what your blend is, 3 or 4 months in advance, and when you want it. And so most of what we have seen logistically, just to make life easy, is that biochar is blended after the fact, and usually it's blended with compost that's ready to go. And then oftentimes, just because also logistics, it'll usually sit there for 3 days to 3 weeks or so. They'll stage it just before, and that seems to be really effective. And we've generally seen that there's no mix that's bad. 5% biochar, 95% biochar. Anytime you're mixing compost and biochar, it's usually synergies. Like, there's usually synergies involved,
Yes.
and it's usually better than the sum of the separate parts. and we haven't really found any mix that's wrong. It might be wrong for the specific application. And so that would be more specific to what you're trying to achieve. If you're very happy with your nutrient levels, but you want to basically increase your organic matter, you might want to just kind of focus on more biochar than compost.
Biochar and less compost.
Yeah, but if you're low organic matter and your nutrients across the board are kind of low, bring it all, so maybe a 50-50 or whatever the blend might be. That's kind of a lot of the deciding factor I've seen. Some people incorporate biochar. Some people do annual compost applications just as standard, or every 2 years sometimes as standard, and they'll sometimes incorporate a little bit of biochar into their standard maintenance applications. And it's usually a minority portion. It'll be, maybe 20% by volume, or maybe 30% by volume as part of their maintenance program. And then when they're using biochar as a renovation, right, where they have to
Development, redevelopment.
Yeah, they're a redevelopment, or I said renovation because like yours was, I would call yours a renovation. You didn't redevelop that vineyard, but you had to like renovate it.
But
you had to do some deep ripping. So if you're doing one of those rare events of a redevelopment or some sort of renovation, and you're deep ripping, that's a rare opportunity. And we've generally seen that in those situations, people go majority biochar by volume. So they'll do like 60% biochar, 40% compost, or greater.
Right.
I mean,
So
I think
last
our
long.
stuff has been, I want to say, maybe as low as 30 and as high as 60% biochar.
Yeah.
It just depends. I mean, it's kind of a win-win, right? Regardless. And, so of course, there's also a cost component. So depending on what you want. And then the other question was around biostimulants, correct? And then mycorrhizal
Yes.
sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So I personally am not a fan of most of that stuff in terms of adding it to your soil, because I have trouble with suppliers. I kind of if you're in plant pathology, if you had plant pathology classes, you know what Koch's postulate is, right? It's a disease thing that says, okay, you have a disease, you add it to, you think it's a disease organism, you put it on a plant, it infects the plant, causes disease, you take that disease tissue and you pull that same organism back out again, right? So that does not exist in the beneficial world, right? No one does that. So I don't you can add mycorrhizal all you want. That doesn't mean that it's actually growing in your soil once you apply it, right? It doesn't, and no one will do that work to do that. And I want to say one of the jobs I had as an undergraduate was suppliers would send us inoculants, and this was for legumes, and this is corn, soybeans, wheat, things like that. And part of our job was to test this stuff, was 96 well plates, and add it and then pull it back out again. And most of the time we couldn't pull it back out again. And this is using basic genetic, right? Like, because the stuff in the soil outcompetes it in 3 seconds. Like, it just dies. So I'm generally not, you can add, if you want, you can buy a microbial inoculant, whether that's, mycorrhizal or whatever. But unless that company can tell you 2 years later that it's still there, and it actually is there colonizing your plants, or they can you can send them a random bulk of soil and they can go, oh yeah, look, there's our organism. Then you're not doing anything. You're just spending your money.
I'm
Right?
seeing Aisha wanting to chime in, who is doing some of her work in exactly this. So,
well, I think there's an underlying part of that comment, which is something I see a lot, is that I think there's a confusion where blending biochar with compost and other things like that can improve it. But I think a lot of people assume the flip side, or maybe there's been stories on the flip side, that you should never use raw biochar. And we just haven't found that to be true
Yeah.
in all the field work that we've done. And if you look at the current data, I think this is a story that's lived on well past its lifetime. That like, oh, well, you can't apply it raw; it has to be inoculated or has to be blended or charged or whatever the word is used. And we just haven't found that to be true. I think the Oasis Vineyard field trial, it's a randomized replicated plot design covering 8 acres. We did a lot of work, a lot of money went into this. It was funded by California Department of Water Resources. The biochar alone did fantastic. I mean, the biochar plus compost obviously did better, but the biochar alone did fantastic, and it started it started showing positive results pretty much right away. So, you know, if you have general good field maintenance, there's nothing wrong with applying raw biochar.
But yeah, it's just a numbers game too. I mean, I think if we would inoculate seeds with, you know, 10 to the 12th per mil of microbes, right? Then we would plant them. But if you use the old school, and I'm old, I'm not gonna, you know, 10 to the 8th to 10 to the 12th per gram of soil, like the 10 to the 8th per mil is a drop in the bucket. Like, I mean, it's not even, you know, there's so much more life that's already there that, you know, a little tiny bit of something else is not, it doesn't really, at least in my experience, just take over and dominate or anything like that. I mean, you could even equate it to, you know, we're in the wine grape world, you know, wine grape fermentations, even when they're inoculated with super high made yeasts, are not pure cultures. They are maybe 60% of that inoculated yeast. The rest of the work is just natural, despite the fact that that yeast was literally made in a lab, most likely, or selected over hundreds and hundreds of years to do that job. It's still not a pure culture. So, I mean, I equate that the same, except the soil is even more diverse with you know, biological life that, you know, you don't necessarily need to do that. I mean,
Yeah, you might just be able to culture what you've got right there in your soil and really facilitate the homes for those organisms. Aisha, do you want to share for a moment? I think you came on camera for a reason because you have something to say about that question.
It was exciting to hear other people talk about this. So this is what my research is on, as I'm looking at the addition of microbial inoculum to biochar amendments and what kind, if they make a difference, and if so, what kind. And yeah, we're finding that the commercial inoculums that are available to farmers don't really do anything. And so, yeah, I completely agree. And for those exact same reasons too, is that a lot of times they're using, they are using a general mycorrhizae that isn't necessarily native to that soil. And so the native mycorrhizae are out competing. And so, yeah, just agreeing with what Patrick was saying.
Another question from our audience.
Somebody asked for my email, and yes, of course, they, you know, you guys have it. Happy to talk to anybody.
Share your email for sure. In a vineyard setting, how do pesticides affect the microbiology in biochar? Any thoughts on that?
Ooh, man, that's a pretty heady research-based question. I mean,
I'm gonna put it the opposite. There's actually a notable thing that you do need to be aware of, and that's if you're using pre-emergence. The same way you can do carbon stripping. I forget exactly what they call it, but I think you know what that is. Is that the right word? Where they do carbon stripping? Basically, you can put little strips of carbon and put your seeds there, and then use a pre-emergent on the whole thing, and the carbon will soak up the pre-emergent, and your seeds will go. But where you don't have the carbon, I don't. Well, is that what it's called?
No, not in vines. No, but okay, we also have the benefit of. Sorry.
People do that with some. Kristin popped on. She probably knows the term I'm talking about. But biochar, if you apply raw,
talking about carbon banding. It's called carbon banding, and it's really commonly used here in Oregon where they do this. But in terms of pesticides, like that's for an herbicide, right?
Okay.
But most pesticides are not soil applied. So most fungicides, most herbicides, right? Unless you're dealing with a pre-emergent herbicide like diuron or something like that. Most herbicides like Roundup is foliar applied.
Yeah.
And this is really to, you know, have a target effect on the weeds. And those are being sprayed in the rows on the surface, even of the soil. And so when you're doing like this deep trenching, you're probably not seeing an impact on the efficacy of the pesticide. Especially if you're talking like a fungicide, an insecticide, something along that line. If you're talking about an herbicide, maybe if you're using a pre-emergent, but not likely, especially in vineyards that, you know, are using alleyway plantings. You know, if you're planting in row, yeah. So I mean, I think there's the potential for it, but if you're applying it deep, probably not for herbicides and probably not at all for fungicides or insecticides.
Yeah, that's the only really impact. The only notable impact is that the biochar can negatively it'll change the efficacy of a pre-emergent, basically. If you apply large rates of raw biochar, it'll affect the efficacy rate of a pre-emergent. Other than that, you know, it's not really going to reduce the efficacy of herbicides and pesticides, but it can help kind of soak them up. So it does show an ability to help reduce toxicity, bioavailable toxicity of a variety of potentially toxic elements. And that's kind of broadly useful. It can be slightly different for individual potentially toxic elements, but just broadly, it is somewhat effective at reducing. Right, Kristin, you're tilting your head.
No, I'm just reading a question. Sorry.
Okay.
Question. So I was.
Yeah, I mean, the question for us would be, you know, to be honest, all of my vineyards are certified organic, every last one, and we have
But you still
7
apply
or
like
9
copper,
that are
right?
regenerative organic certified. So
yeah, I mean, you still use pesticides and herbicides,
yes.
just not. I mean, they're organically made, and certainly like biochar is going to absorb copper, right? We know this, and copper is one of the biggest fungicides used in organic.
Only where it rains. Only where it rains. I haven't.
Right.
I can count on my hands the time I've used the number of times in the last 20 years I've used copper in vineyards. So,
but
East Coast French, yes. But.
Yeah, I will also say, like, just to chime in on the microbial question, like whether or not, I mean, microbes have to eat, right? They're just like humans. They eat organic matter. They require that. If you're adding microbial inoculum to raw biochar without compost, you're not giving those microbes anything to eat, because all they have is the volatile fraction of that compost or that biochar to munch on. The compost, not only does it contain really, you know, generally beneficial organisms, but it also has a food source right there that allow those organisms to establish and thrive. So whether or not you harvest locally effective microbes from the soil, we've done that where we kind of make a soil brew and then we, you know, filter it. So we collect the microbes, we put it on there. We haven't found that to be really effective. I think, you know, adding organic matter, you know, allows soil microbes to thrive. And if you're low in organic matter in your soil, the last thing you want to do is add in a bunch of microbes that are going to eat your existing organic matter and blow it off, and then not have any lasting effect. So certainly if you're gonna, like Josiah said, there's nothing wrong with adding raw biochar. But if you're gonna inoculate, just do it with compost. It's easy, it's fast, it has other benefits. There's no reason to invest lots of money in either harvesting microbes from the topsoil or buying microbes that you don't know what their effects are on your soil directly. So add organic matter.
Yeah, and we're really talking about building soil microbial habitat here, right? When we talk about the soil health management systems principles, we're talking about building them a home by minimizing disturbance and maximizing cover, and then feeding them with hopefully diverse stuff and hopefully year round and not just part of the year. So you can get out a lot of that in a vineyard. I'm curious, as we're talking about sort of combining practices, right? Combining compost with biochar, possibly inoculating or not. Are you familiar of anybody who is cover cropping and adding biochar? Does that mean that you need less of an addition to the biochar because you've got the cover crops? Are there other practices that are being integrated beyond compost?
Well, cover crop is pretty general. I mean, honestly, all of our vineyards have cover cropping, whether it's even the basics for winter erosion control, right? To the permanent no-till, you know, where I got some funky grasses that are literally still green and it's July, right? Like, and everything in between. So it kind of dovetails on what Kristin is like, okay, so let's say that's a whole different arena, but most people that I know are doing that as well, right? So if I'm adding, biochar, let's say at development, and then I'm putting in we talked about vine or maybe your primary crop being healthier, bigger, more vigorous, et cetera, et cetera. But if that's also affecting your cover crop in the same way, of course, right? Like the living root is what feeds the soil, right? So the more living roots you have, the more soil health you're going to have. So like that should be a multiplier, right? Now, whether you would use less, and again, in a no-till system, of course, if you really wanted to get the best out of the biochar, you'd have to incorporate it, which would be destroying your no-till system. So at least temporarily. So that would be a trade-off there. I mean, we've again, I would say like you got to incorporate it. You got to get it in the ground, right? In the soil as best as you can, and depending on, as deep as you can relatively. Does that make sense?
That does, yeah. Does anybody else want to comment on that in the last couple of minutes we have, and then we'll close out?
On the cover cropping thing, like Patrick was saying, is kind of standard in vineyards. There's almost always some amount of greenery. It's just a matter of when they till it in. If they leave it green during the summer, or some people kind of turn it over. And with a redevelopment, Monterey Pacific, who did the Oasis, they were the vineyard management company who managed the Oasis field trial for the past 8-something years now. We did a bunch of experiments with them before that trial as well that helped inform us what to do. And one of them was testing biochar 100% broadcast, 100% down the planting row, and then both. And we found that with a redevelopment, if you support the cover crop, sometimes it's at the expense of your really tiny little vines. So the broadcast biochar overall increased the carrying capacity of that area, but a lot of that was found in the cover crop. And so that's one of the reasons why they switched towards, with the redevelopment, making sure to get it down in that planting row, as well as maybe on the surface, because there can be a balance to, is what they had discovered, to supporting that cover crop too much. Now, they took that same information and took that to other vineyards that had less vigorous cover crop, and then did the same thing, where they can say, all right, our existing vines are doing great, but our cover crop is not, and that is impacting how much water infiltration we're able to capture during the rain events and the more clayey soils. How can we use biochar and compost to help support our cover crop now that our vineyards are established, so that we get more vigor in the vineyard and more infiltration during the rain periods?
Thank you so much for all the incredible information that you've shared. I hope everybody who's still here is inspired. This is some really great stuff. We will be posting this recorded webinar on the Farmland Information Center site with our webinar series, and you can find it there. So thank you very much for joining us today. Really excited. Feel free to send us questions. They help us inform what topics we're going to tackle next. And of course, feel free to get in touch with our speakers. Thank you, Josiah. Thank you, Patrick. Really appreciate you giving us your time and sharing all of your great insights. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.